Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. fought for freedom, justice, and equality in the United States, and the whole world took notice. An advocate for the rights of African Americans, he became a voice for the poor and oppressed everywhere. Through November 2008, the Humanities Council of Washington, D.C. convened a series of events to explore and celebrate Dr. King's global legacy, giving freedom a world voice.
We have inherited a large house,
a great world,
the world house,
in which we have to live together.
Black and white, Easterner, Westerner,
Gentile and Jew,
Catholic and Protestant,
Muslim and Hindu.
A family unduly separated.
In ideas, culture, and interests.
Who, because we can never again live apart,
must learn somehow
to live with each other
in peace.
Mid to late 1950s, Dr. King talked a lot about the New South. So his vision moved from the New South to the American dream to the world house. And I think his own person embodied this advancement because he moved from being what? A little known Southern Baptist preacher to becoming an American icon and ultimately to becoming a world figure. And we have to keep in mind that his goal was always the beloved community, an integrated society of people coming together irrespective of race, class, religion, political orientation. That was his dream.
When Martin appears on the scene, he appears on the scene with nonviolent direct action. Now, we liked it, but we didn't believe it. And the real reason we didn't believe it because it hadn't been done. We'd heard about Gandhi somewhere, but he didn't know these Southern white boys, right? We were reaching the conscience of the world, and that was coming back on America and the South.
From King to Barack Obama, it's certainly not linear because democracy does not progress in a linear fashion in the United States. The first generation of black elected officials were people like Hiram Revels. These were people like Robert Smalls of South Carolina. These were about 24 black congressmen who served between 1868 and 1901. So there's a clear line, even though it doesn't progress in the way that America's popular imagination likes to think in terms of democracy. There's a clear line between what King provided the nation as an example and what we just witnessed on November 4th.
The election of Obama was undoubtedly change way the rest of the world view America. And it will also change to some extent the way the rest of the world view African Americans. I think it's important, as the question suggests, that we think of ourselves as being connected to the rest of the people around the world, and not just think of ourselves as Americans. We see signs all over the place, God bless America. We are part of a global community. And I think there's a sense in which many of us have always realized that. I think Obama realizes that in order to live out the fullness of Dr. King's dream, his vision for humanity, we have to see ourselves as part of a globalized world and not separated from it.
The way I always interpreted that as a historian was not that King was saying we would no longer see racial differences. It was about no longer attaching negative connotations to racial differences, right? So we can be proud that Barack Obama is black, the same way Irish Catholics were proud that John F. Kennedy was the first Irish Catholic president. But we're not going to just say he's in that box in a narrow way. He's just a black president. And that's what Dr. King was talking about. So we could be black, but we could also be in the community and also be somebody who is a universal representative of larger purposes and interests and issues.
This year, our board and staff decided to focus our international events around the commemoration of the death of Martin Luther King, and in this way, to highlight the extraordinary global influence that Dr. King had on individuals and countries around the world. People who use and continue to use his philosophy, his ideas, and his tactics in their own democratic movements to pursue freedom and justice. We hope that these 15 programs will provide you with a renewed appreciation and a deeper understanding of King's international contributions, and will inspire all of us to redouble our efforts to create King's beloved community and to build the World House. We will present 15 events, symposia, concerts, and exhibits in every ward of the city on this global theme, Giving Freedom a World Voice, a reflection on the global legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King.
But you know, I see a lot more smiles on people's faces in this room tonight. Why are we happy? Why are we happy? Why are we happy? It's been a long time, but such a short time. Do you realize what has happened in this country in 43 years? 43 years ago, black folk couldn't vote. While a student at Crozier Theological Seminary, still a teenaged Martin was introduced to the teachings and activism of Mahatma Gandhi. King later wrote that he was electrified by Gandhi's concept of soul force, the power of love and truth, and how it could be used as a tool for social change. It was channeled through peaceful protests such as strikes, boycotts, and protest marches. The most famous example, of course, of Gandhi's was his 1930 March to the Sea, during which more than 60,000 people walked 250 miles in protest of British rule in India. This global perspective only continued to grow in the last months of King's life. And in 1967, the Christian Sermon on Peace, he argued that humanity would survive only if people began looking past race, class, and nationality and developed a world perspective. We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. From Rome, Pope Paul VI expressed his profound sadness. The Japanese government declared that it was gravely concerned. In Nigeria, the American embassy hung a portrait of King draped in a black crepe outside the front door. The British Parliament passed resolutions expressing its sorrow. King was more than just a civil rights leader in America. He was now a world leader. And there's so many stories I can tell you, but I wound up driving for Dr. King for about 9 to 10 months. And I traveled with him basically at most of the end of '66 and parts of '67. I was with him at Riverside when he gave his speech. I was with him at the United Nations when he gave his speech.
I do remember one day, he and I were walking across the beautiful Morehouse College campus. And he said to me, I said to him rather, I said, Doc, how you doing? His friends called him Doc. He said, Julian, I'm not doing well. He said, unemployment is high, bigotry is everywhere, discrimination is ever present. I feel awful, he said. I have a nightmare. I said, Doc, turn that around. Try I Have a Dream.
The spring of 2002, where we were ducking under the windowsill of our home in Ramallah in the occupied Palestinian territories, and we had a megaphone propped on the windowsill, and it's an open window, but we were ducking and we were reading Martin Luther King, Letters from Birmingham Jail, I Have a Dream, and other speeches to soldiers in a big tank parked right outside our door and had its turret pointed at our house.
Martin Luther King's impact, not simply in the days gone by, but in the days to come and presently. That impact, as you know and you have seen, is a very deep one, and not simply in this country, but all around the world.
These Palestinian refugees, the ones from Iraq, on the border, have no place to go. There is literally no country in the region that would take them. And it was my learning about this population and then going out to the camps and securing permission to do that, that it struck me that if I were to remain silent after what I saw, that there would just be complete silence, that there was nobody working on behalf of these people to find them homes.
Martin Luther King's work on non-discrimination, his work in this country, was the impetus to a very large extent of the independence struggles in Africa. And we found very many preachers speaking up, and then later on mosques became also important. But very many people would go to the pulpit and use it as a platform to encourage people, to organize people, to inspire people. The other side of this story, which is that because of Martin Luther King and his success in organizing people and his success in moving an agenda, the African dictators, particularly after independence, also learned from him. And they learned how to try and control people.
In his letter from a Birmingham jail, he said that oppressed people cannot remain oppressed forever. And he was trying to explain the importance of of nonviolent marches and why people had to march, why people had to vent. And he said if they didn't do this, then their pent-up frustration will manifest itself into violence.
We do need to think harder, we do need to work harder at pushing that nonviolent approach more. It's always harder, clearly, sometimes even much more dangerous, but I think it's way more effective.
That ultimately is a choice that many of the successful nonviolent movements have made to those who would oppress them, is to say you can either work with us who are nonviolent or you can confront the violence.
I'm also reminded very much of a discussion I had some years ago with Graça Machel, now the wife of Nelson Mandela. We were having a discussion. She said to me that she has no regrets about the armed struggle in Mozambique through the group called Frelimo, except that one of the consequences of the armed struggle is that young people in independent Mozambique, once they have a confrontation, an argument, they go back to their homes and come back with their guns and start shooting each other. So there is a consequence, and I think you see it in this country, in the United States as well. The fact that this country was formed from an armed struggle in the 1700s, and you see the right to bear arms a very significant part of the culture of this country, and bearing arms and the violence you have in the shooting, the Columbine, whatever it is.
Nonviolence needs to be looked at not as sort of a holy kind of way of operating, but as a tactic and a strategy that can or cannot be successful and needs to be analyzed, in certain circumstances to the specificities of those cases.
We look forward to a day when in the not too distant future in this country, we are able to have Martin Luther King's teachings, his work, his life, not simply inspire us, but guide us as to how we should live our own lives.
What would this world look like today? What would this country look like today had we not lost Dr. King 40 years ago? How would our movements for equality, for justice, for civil rights, for human rights, how would that look different today had Dr. King been around to continue to shine his light upon all of us?
In the case of, for example, Mahatma Gandhi, on a time scale on the order of about 50 years, his movement was successful, at least in the sense that India got independence. Martin Luther King's case, also on the order of about 50 years, his movement, you can say, at least the visible sign of success is the election of Barack Obama.
I think it's worth constantly reminding ourselves of this incredible historical moment that we're in, and understanding not just the moment, but where we came from. And when we look back to think about where we came from, we of course have to come and confront Dr. King and his work and his legacy.
I'm a correspondent for CBS News and reported from Baghdad from 2003 to 2006 until I became a casualty of that war. So I have a lot to be thankful for just to be here with you tonight on this planet. That was not the first time I saw violence. I cover a part of the world where so often religion divides. It is a pretext for war. It is an honor to be here tonight, celebrating bringing the faiths together. And it promises to be a very unique evening. Where else could you experience in a single concert Cambodian Buddhist dancers, Indonesian Muslim singers, a 2,000-year-old Hindu temple dance, the girls' choir from the cathedral, the Metropolitan Washington Baha'i Chorale, and the music ministry of St. Anthony's Catholic Church. And as you'll see and hear tonight, that's not all.
Council, we've never had such a great turnout, and I attribute it to the wonderful partnership with the Humanities Council. Thank you for doing it. My old friend Michael Eric Dyson here, and Deborah, who I've admired more from afar, but have read all of her books, and one of the great influences. And we're really talking about rhetoric, language, Dr. King's legacy, and there's no better time to be doing it than now. And perhaps, Deborah, you can set it up, because of all things, you were there in front of the Lincoln Memorial in 1968 as a young teenager listening to the I Had a Dream speech. Tell us what that was like, and tell us what the speech was like.
I feel such a special connection because of that. I also realize how old it makes me. I was 18. It was between my first and second years of college. I can remember the incredible sense of excitement to turn up in Harlem in the middle of the night and see buses as far as you could see lining both sides of 125th Street. There were so many buses going down. And the ride in the bus and the incredible sense of unity, and really pretty much what Martin Luther King was talking about, what the whole march was about. I remember I was, for some reason, standing up we'd been sitting down, but for some reason standing up when his voice came on. And I can remember just stopping dead in my tracks and kind of holding my breath. And when I say that I reacted that way, and the reason I think I remember that reaction was simply the impact of the word.
50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. Despite the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream that, in fact, let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Look how his voice rises and falls.
And the passion behind him.
A dream deeply rooted in the American dream.
And ending with let freedom ring and free at last. I think it was brilliant in echoing the legacy of Lincoln that was right behind him.
As Professor Tannen has said, the cadence, the repetition of phrases, all of these Greek terms we could deploy, anaphora. He could talk about his sense of evoking God's presence when God is not there. You can talk about his consciousness of history. And really, Dr. King was at his best when he was improvising, which doesn't mean he was creating whole cloth. He had set pieces in his own rhetorical panoply, so to speak, that he pulled upon. And he takes flight that has made that speech one of the great, if not the greatest, rhetorical performances in public spaces in the 20th century. Mahalia Jackson is standing, allegedly, on the sides, seeing that for King it's about a C+ speech. Now, for everybody else it would be A+. But for Martin Luther King Jr., about a C+. That speech was not only a patchwork of perhaps other speeches that he had given, it's a patchwork of other speeches that other people had given. And so what Dr. King did was weave together into his rhetorical tapestry elements from Archibald Carey's speech before, I think 1952, before the Republican Convention. King was influenced by him, took parts of that speech, put it into his own speech, so he was able verbally and oratorically to merge these various voices. Here's our level of acknowledgement. First time we hear it, as Professor Tannen says. Second time we says, as somebody says. Third time, like I always say. So Martin Luther King Jr. had appropriated that particular strategy, but when it comes honestly, there are many different sources that are integrated into the Birmingham letter, but the heart, morally speaking, of that letter is all King, and its intent to resist dominant forms of white supremacy do reflect his own views. William Augustus Jones, who was a preacher in Brooklyn, who had one of these, they said he had a voice like God, but only deeper. And he says, when you get up there real close to God, where you can smell the sweet incense burning on the heavenly altar, watch out. And then with the crisis swelling to bewildering proportions, with the shepherd about to be slain and the sheep about to be scattered, with Gethsemane beckoning and Calvary calling. So when you see those rhetorical uses, the tropes, the metaphors, the similes, the analogies, the conjuring of God's presence in the absence of anything but the Spirit, Martin Luther King Jr. can be explained. Barack Obama comes out of that tradition by reference.
The theme
theme of tonight is global youth struggle. We all know how it is to deal with parents that don't seem to quite get it, balance school with free time and parties, and try to figure out who we are and what we want to be. Youth can relate to each other in this way. What we must remember is that we are the present and the future, just like the youth all over the world. And we're part of what Dr. Martin Luther King called the World House.
A current event that I'm really interested in now is Proposition 8. It's like the whole gay marriage thing. I think that it's important that we respect marriage and the traditions in our country. Marriage is between a man and a woman.
Marriage may be sacred, but in America, a lot of people are divorced and people get remarried. So apparently marriage isn't working out amazingly here anyway. Gay people are a minority too. They're not hurting anyone by being gay. And because of that, it's extremely wrong to actually have a law that says that they can't have rights to get married if they love each other.
If I had a chance to vote, I would vote for Obama. Not because of his race, but because I think he could make a change.
America hasn't had an African American president, never in their history. So I think that's a big change that had already occurred.
Do you feel like racism in this country has been eradicated simply because he's now the president-elect?
Obviously, there's still racial problems in America, but we can't use that as an excuse anymore. If Obama can become the president, then I think what it should do for us is it should show us that we really have to do our best.
If any of you guys have listened to him speak, it's just so amazing, and it's just like really cool to hear and see his vision of the world.
In one sense, the civil rights movement in the United States is a special American phenomenon which must be understood in the light of American history and dealt with in terms of the American situation. But in another and more important level, what's happening in the United States today is a relatively small part of a world development. King's quest for justice's emphasis on the power of moral conscience and nonviolence had been formative for West German activists.
So these soldiers who then come to Germany in the 50s, of course, they are also, they are inspired by Martin Luther King and by these things. On what you found, of course, in the 1950s is protests by soldiers. You have sit-ins.
Also in East Germany, people met in churches opposed to the East German government. And what they sang was, "We shall overcome." So the civil rights movement has had a worldwide influence.
When invited to Oslo in December 1964 to accept the Nobel Peace Prize, King even went a step further in his sermon and compared the civil rights struggle in the United States to the political struggle of the divided city of Berlin. He said, "For just as we are proving to be the testing ground of races living together in spite of their differences, if ever there were people who should be constantly sensitive to their destiny, the people of Berlin, East and West, should be they."
Civil rights movement, just like Martin Luther King, it almost belongs to the world. And we need to spend much, much more time to go outside of America and find that story and really tell it.
Humanities Council of Washington, D.C.'s program on an International Symposium. This is part of their series to honor the voice of Martin Luther King. In the United States, we have seen much the same in the post-war period in looking at the challenges associated with the aspirations, especially of peoples of color, especially African Americans here. We've seen the rise of so much of the quest for the examination and the flowering of the spirit, and I think Dr. Dodge will put his collecting in the context of the spirit of the people in their through their art.
I'm also glad that you're pointing out the relationship between Martin Luther King and this art.
The mind of the collector and the impulse of the collector, and why you would engage in this enterprise.
These artists were struggling against oppression and exploitation and deprived of their jobs.
It was other directed. It was in support of these artists whom you came to know and to love.
Some of them, as you'll see, suffered very severely from a institution, that's the Soviet state, which violated all its principles and its constitution. And whether it will ever catch up with its constitution, I don't know. But it seems that we are catching up with our own constitution, and Martin Luther King played a big role in that, so I would feel that there is a kindred spirit.
Dr. King writes, "A true revolution of values will soon cause us to question the fairness and justice of many of our past and present policies. We are called to play Good Samaritan on life's roadside, but that will only be an initial act. One day the whole Jericho Road must be transformed so that men and women will not be beaten and robbed as they make their journey through life. True compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It understands that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring." And I think this really resonated throughout the campaign as a whole. What's our role to our fellow man? As you all know, we're here to talk about President-elect Barack Obama, how he emerged for many as a global leader as well as a national one, as well as Senator Hillary Clinton, who broke many barriers in her historic bid to win the 2008 Democratic presidential nomination race. Both, as they have publicly acknowledged, are benefactors of the struggles and victories led by Dr. King more than 40 years ago.
On the day after the election, I was doing an interview with a BBC reporter, and the reporter asked me how long I had waited in line, and I said 389 years. And what I was attempting to do, of course, is to link this long path that it took to get to the point where we're at. Certainly, Barack Obama made history, but history also made Barack Obama.
Dr. King was able to change America. It was in some ways to produce, he probably didn't imagine a Barack Obama, but he probably imagined an America that would allow a Barack Obama to emerge.
Now, let me just stop here for a second and say that I have a different view to the extent that we say Obama as an extension of King. Let me suggest to you that I think Dr. King really was not a politician, that he really was a person of conscience and appealed to conscience in order to create social change. And Dr. King was willing, all too willing, to go to jail if he was necessary to violate a law that he felt was unconscionable. That's a different role to play in American life. And it certainly is, as Clarence was saying, necessary in order to create the possibility of a Barack Obama.
While King was not a politician, he was political. And in that sense, this is where I think there's a link between the Kings and the Obamas and those who arise and are seen as leaders in the black community. Whereas King positioned himself and was seen as a black leader, Obama is a leader who is black.
One of the wonders of Barack Obama is, of course, that he didn't speak much about race during the campaign, sought to downplay it. Barack Obama really made an effort to cross racial lines, not in the way that Dr. King crossed racial lines, but to cross racial lines so as to impress on people that they could trust him, like him, and vote for him. He was a political animal displaying the kind of ambition and the desire to win votes, at times by not taking positions on controversial issues, including controversial racial issues, that Dr. King would have found untenable. Dr. King would have been, wait, no, here's right, and I'm speaking for right. But I think Barack Obama realized speaking for right may not win you votes.
Obama winning changes this country as much as it reflects change that has already happened in this country.
Dr. King's focus was on challenging the existing system in terms of its attitudes on race. And he didn't even have in his mind, but possibly a dream, of someone like a Barack Obama.
Please give our guests another round of applause, and thank you for coming out.
100 million people have been pushed into poverty in 2008. 13.3 million children in the United States are below the poverty line. 3 billion people are living on less than $2 per day.
But Dr. King said, there's nothing new about poverty. What's new is that we have the ability to solve poverty. The question is, do we have the will? And that's just it. We just have to have the will.
When you look at what Dr. King was saying, the essence of it was you have to have this system built on economic justice. And if you do that, it's sort of his religious message, right? If you build your house on the rock, then it will be stable. And we have been building on sand. And that's why we see the earth shaking right now. And it's shaking the foundation of what we are on. What have we done in the last, I would say, 40 years that has exacerbated all of this is to sort of ignore the need to have economic justice worldwide. We have continued a model of exploitation.
This country, when it wants to, can find $1 trillion in 2 weeks and not even know how to spend it. The problem isn't with the people who are in poverty. The problem is we allow poverty to occur in the wealthiest country in the world. And Dr. King saw this as a strong moral condemnation of this country, but you can't do that either. You can't morally condemn this country, so anyone who's not succeeding is a failure, because America works. No matter what we do, no matter how many bad investments we make, our economic system is correct, and if you're not making it, it's because of your failure.
I think we have to ignore the press because they get the economy wrong and they report it wrong, and we have to empower ourselves and realize the power that we have.
Believe in yourself. If your economy's not doing well, don't believe that's just you. And the economy is booming. It's always talk about the economy's doing this. What is your economy doing?
Stop thinking small. Because when Wall Street was in trouble, they didn't think small. And we have to stop thinking small and realize the power we have and then take advantage of it.
To me, King's words really call out to me the need to go back to some of the social action he was talking about, and we have to put the demands that King had put forward in 68 back on the table in 2008, 2009.
I think as a world, we have to come to grips with this current global economic crises, and we as a world have to agree on how will we handle this overcapacity, because many people say, well, now it's the autos, but who's going to be next? Well, yes, there will be others next, and unless we come up with how we are going to approach this as a world, other countries need to solve this overcapacity problem in everything else, in computers, in television.
It's industry by industry instead of looking at the workers. And I'm not a trained economist like Professor Spriggs, but I do not believe the American economy can function if the American people don't have money. And we don't have money. They keep talking about the financial system doesn't have liquidity. The American people don't have liquidity. We've maxed out our cars. We've taken all the money out of our houses that we can. We haven't been getting an increase in wages. So how are we going to pull out of this? November 3rd, before the election, a third of black children lived in poverty. And for 2 years of presidential debates, I don't think I ever heard that. November 5th, after Barack Obama won, we still have a third of black children living in poverty. And I guarantee January 21st, we'll have a third of black children living in poverty. And my concern is that in 2010, January 20th or whatever, we'll have more black children living in poverty because of this great economic recession that is kind of sweeping across America.
It is quite evident that one of the major issues raised here today, and we have to keep monitoring, is whether from the time of Dr. Martin Luther King to Mr. Obama, whether we will have a rupture in the approach to dealing with poverty effectively, or whether we will have an evolution.
To paraphrase another great American intellectual, Dr. Margaret Mead, never doubt that a thoughtful, committed individual can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has.
From time immemorial, men have lived by the principle that self-preservation is the first law of life. But this is a false assumption. I would say that the other preservation is the first law of life. It is the first law of life precisely because we cannot preserve self without being concerned about preserving other selves.
When you read this book, and the book is called Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community, and I recommend it to you because what Dr. King was writing in 1976, a year before he died, and we were studying as graduate students this book, he was laying out a plan of action after seeing so many things that he had hoped for come about through legislation. And this was a wise man who knew that if we did not have a plan, we would dissolve into either chaos or we would build community. I will let you decide what you think the answer to that might be. But his last and prophetic chapter is called The World House. And what he wanted to do was to move the civil rights movement from a small group of people, that is African Americans, out to a broader public and a broader world. And he wanted to, and he defined that by calling it the World House. And he is great with metaphors. He says, we've all inherited this big house, the world. And I'm going to use my interpretation. And we just can't seem to get along in this house at all.
The time of Ptolemy, when he was an astronomer who believed that the Earth was the center of the universe and everything else revolved around it. It took 700 years for Copernicus and others to come up with the other paradigm, which was that the sun was the center and everything else revolved around the sun. Many people died along the way that tried to change that paradigm, but it took a lot of different pokes at that paradigm in order to shift, but it took 700-800 years before that happened. And so for us to be able to experience a paradigm shift like we did today or 2 weeks ago is pretty remarkable. A paradigm shift changes the whole foundation upon which we put thought together. So just the way we think is suddenly different. When we speak about the World House, the World House has changed in this process. It's no longer this group of people is here and this group of people here. We're all in this together.
This moment in time has opened up a path for this type of dialogue to go, and that's a step in the right direction. You know, as I said, you know, the ills of this world are not going to be cured overnight.
Public kinship, for me, and I want to just give this definition as we start to talk about this, is how do we learn to say publicly and privately that we are all related and a part of what Dr. King called that, I think he called it a web of humanity that are inextricably tied together as one group. I don't think many of us got the significance of what Dr. King was saying when Dr. King was saying it. But I tell you, one of the things that we are now faced with is the ability to make Dr. King's dream a reality.
This idea of public kinship is essentially a very old idea. I mean, we used to call it community, and then we used to call it civic engagement, and then we used to call it social responsibility, and then there was Facebook, and now we call it social networking, and on and on and on. But essentially, it is this old human need to connect and an understanding that for anything to get done, it gets done as a community.
It really was about bringing community together and having this conversation, because I did truly believe that we are all connected to one another. And if we can only be in the same space together, we can understand what makes us all human beings.
There is a saying with American Indians, Matakwiyase, all my relations. It's how they greet one another. Matakwiyase. When you say that to someone, you're saying all my relations. We are all brothers and sisters. We are all connected. We are all family. So when we come together in a room like this
and share with one another and learn with one another and try to come together and gain a greater understanding of one another, then we can see what our future is. And I think us having elected Obama just 2-3 weeks ago, it has shown the country and the world that if we want peace, we have to fight for justice. What did he say? This belongs to all of us, and only if all of us come together and fight with him, this grassroots level, we can change the world, we can change our community. So in closing, matakuiase.
How do we connect beyond the communities that we start from? And so when the idea of kinship came to me, one of the first things I thought about my family. And as any family has, there are some people in my family I love to be with, and there's some people in my family it's very tough to be with. And what I learned as
Mother's cracking up next to you.
And one of the things I learned was that in order to bring about change, everybody has to at least begin to think about why do I want to be a part of this? And the exciting thing about the Obama election for me was that in many ways it was a rekindling of the people in this country who were interested in how do I not only improve my life, but how do I improve the lives of other people? And I think what he was able to do was to make that connection. And so what you had was a sense that there is value in community. King always talked about this.
If we're going to produce public kinship, if we're going to make America the paragon we want it to be, this is where we start. And then this is where we work out from to make that happen. If you want to talk, you're going to have to do this. You got to answer 3 questions. Who am I? Who are they? And who are we?
I think the who am I thing is a very personal journey that changes over time. So, for me, I'm a black immigrant Catholic married to a Jew who once lived in New York, who once covered a Klan rally in Virginia.
I'm a young, aspiring college student, obviously African American, but I feel as youth, we label ourselves as students. Like, it's not more of a race issue, it's more of a class issue.
In times of conflict, or when I'm attacked, all my identities come to the top. When 9/11 happened, I became very Muslim, and I became very Arab. And when Obama won, I became black. At any given moment in time, I feel a certain kinship to one identity or another. I feel like my basic identity is a human being, and I see that as being the foundation for all of it.
Who are they? They, like I, are made up of a number of people. They can be white, they can be black, they can be West Indian, they can be African, English, or whatever.
Who are they? They are the gap between the older generations and the youth generations who don't get it or understand that it's changing.
Maybe the most important thing to remember here is that we are often the they from time to time. For me, the they are people who don't pull up far enough when they're trying to turn left. They're Yankee fans. And it may be as serious as that.
I've been working on that they, because that they shifts as my mood shifts. As the people you get angry with, some days it's Fox News, they're they. Then some days it's CNN, they're they. Some days it's Hispanics, they're they. Sometimes it's Black Americans, they're they. It moves around depending upon what I'm feeling emotional about at that time. It's not permanent. But who are we? I think that's the thing we are going to work on in public kinship. We is when we can express our relationship and our relatedness to one another and mean it.
I just see we as people, more or less, people that are relating the best we can, trying to get along in whatever way we know how. I mean, we're all trying to progress. We're always trying to become in harmony.
Here, we are a homogeneous group because we're all concerned and we are conscious about ethnic, racial relations and dialogue.
I consider we, all the disenfranchised people across the world, I think we are, we are Arabs, we are Latin Americans, we are African Americans, we are poor whites, we are Chinese, we are South Asian, we are Russian, you know what I mean?
And the I, the they, the we is very complex because it depends on the context that we're in. If I'm in the context of my family, I am a multiracial person. If I'm in the context of Howard University, I'm an African American. If I'm in the context often with other white people, I am just a black person. And I become they when I'm in a context where people otherize me. So I experience myself as a they sometimes, depending on who I'm with and how people interact with me. And the we becomes people that I'm trying often to make a connection with in common cause. Going to Prince William County, I use the identity of being someone who had ancestry in Virginia that goes back deeper than 200 years as a way of trying to find a we. Or I'd listen to their stories about how healthcare issues were affecting them, so that it wasn't just an issue, it was that person's embodied story. So the we becomes a context. If you other me, then we're both theys. I may even experience myself as they in that context, and if I'm doing that to you. But if we are connecting in some way, then we become a we. So maybe the they is just somebody I haven't made that connection with yet to become we.
But when you answer those 3 questions, or you toil with them, take the next 10 years and work on those 3 questions. It's very, very, very important. We are at the end. I hope you feel very uncomfortable. I hope you feel very angry, because this is the whole point. You will not be able to hide behind your mental models anymore. It is a new world. Mr. Obama, you elected him, has opened up that new world. He's claiming all sorts of things. People in the world are claiming us. We're not necessarily claiming them. They're coming here because they believe there is a new world a-coming. The point is, because we are here, we must define what that new world will be.
From the steps of the Lincoln Memorial to the struggles for African independence, all the way to Gaza, Dr. King's influence on the global struggle for freedom and equality is undeniable. In giving freedom a world voice, DC residents crossing racial, class, and religious lines, experts from the city's great institutions all came together to honor his legacy and reflect on his influence in thought, in word, in deed, demonstrating that the large house King imagined, that great world house, occupies a place right here in the nation's capital.